Okay, folks, let's head into our, is it the fifth or the sixth session today? No, I'm just kidding. It doesn't matter. I'm just talking to see. No, don't listen to me.
It's the Horde of Gondor.
Wait, are you good with, is this working?
I don't know.
Try it, make sure. Okay, let's take our seats so we can go to the next. Oh, you might, Harry, would you click the mouse?
Yes, fantastic.
Okay, wonderful. I'm really excited to introduce James Turner, just received his PhD from Sheffield. And his talk is Rethinking Depression, or Why Most Cases of Depression Are Not Dysfunctional. And I'm sorry to steal your joke, but we are continuing with the theme of the function of bad feelings. I'm sorry about that.
Thank you, Justin. Right, so yes, rethinking depression, why most cases of depression are not dysfunctional. A little bit of background, so you know why we're talking about this. This is mostly something that's sort of a battle between evolutionary theorists and mainstream psychiatrists, but philosophers have become interested in it recently. It's widely accepted that natural selection has endowed us with a low mood system. Don't read too much into system. It could be many systems, but the capacity for low mood was selected for. The reason why lots of people believe this is because if you block low mood in humans and animals, it's incredibly detrimental to things. And it's also believed that mild low mood, so the sort of everyday feeling of being down in the dumps about nothing in particular, and depression are activations of this same system because they have the same defining symptoms, differing only in severity and duration. In fact, that's how you classify someone as depression. They exhibit at least 5 of the key low mood symptoms for 2 weeks or more. Now, mild low mood, I'll just say low mood from now on, save me a word, it's quite a long presentation, is recognized as a normal part of human psychology. No one really disagrees with that, but many psychiatrists believe that depression is a low mood dysfunction, and it's classified as such by manuals such as the DSM. Now, according to most naturalistic philosophers, these psychiatrists are saying that depression is constituted by a low mood system that's failing to carry out the function it was selected for by natural selection. So like a lot of people here, I'm taking this selected effects theory of functional selected dispositions, or whatever we want to call it. If you don't think this is the right theory of function to apply to these kind of questions, probably just have a coffee break. This is not going to be very interesting. What these people are saying is that mild low mood is the activation of a low mood system that's carrying out its proper function, biological function, whatever you want to call it. But depression is constituted by a low mood system that fails to carry out this function. Also, it's thought. Many evolutionary theorists disagree with this. Like everyone else, they believe that mild low mood is the activation of a properly functioning low mood system. But they also believe that many cases of depression are activations of properly functioning low mood systems as well. I argue that these evolutionary theories are correct. In fact, I'll argue that most cases of depression are activations of properly functioning low mood systems. So by and large, depression is not a dysfunction. You can think of it this way. Depression is to mild low mood what severe pain is to mild pain. If you stub your toe, you'll have mild pain, and this is a normal response to damage. If you break your leg, you'll have long-lasting and severe pain. And though your leg is dysfunctional, the pain is not. And a similar thing is going to apply to low mood, where if you fail at something that's kind of small, you'll have mild low mood that lasts for a little bit of time. But if you go bankrupt or your long-term partner leaves you, you may go into a low mood for a very long time. I'm going to do this first by arguing that dysfunctions necessarily exhibit at least one of 5 features, which I'll come to shortly, and then I'll show that depression exhibits none of these features. So what are the 5 features of dysfunction? Well, I'm not going to give an entire account of what dysfunction is. We've had 2 talks this morning that go through all the details about function that we could possibly want to know. And for this reason, I'm going to go through this kind of quick. So a lot of this should be fairly familiar by now. But I'm going to give an account of the key features of dysfunction that pretty much everyone agrees with, even if they disagree on the specifics of what makes something a function. So let's begin with systems are dysfunctional when they fail to carry out their selected for effects or outputs. But they're also considered dysfunctional when they have non-selected for effects or outputs. Fabian mentioned this as well. And this doesn't include normal side effects of selected effects. So I'll give you some examples to make that clearer. A heart that fails to beat is dysfunctional. It fails to have its selected for effect. But also a heart that sends out pain signals every beat is also dysfunctional. It wasn't selected to send out pain signals, so if it does, it's dysfunctional. But a heart that makes a beating noise isn't dysfunctional. Beating noises weren't selected for, but they're normal side effects of selected for effects. I'll just move on through this because a lot of these examples you've heard today twice or so. Now, facultative adaptations like the low mood system. So these are adaptations that aren't always on as such. They have response functions, as we talked about earlier. Are dysfunctional when they fail to have their selected for effects given their selected for inputs or causes, or they activate given non-selected for inputs or causes. So a lack of pain following bodily damage, say, would be a feature of a dysfunctional pain system. Or pain following a tickle or the sight of the color yellow. If every time you saw yellow, you got sharp pain in your head, that would be a dysfunctional pain system. And of course, no input whatsoever. So if you were just walking around and then all of a sudden you're in pain, dysfunctional pain system. And also function descriptions specify that systems do certain things to certain degrees. And systems that carry out their functions to an extreme or a minimal degree are also considered dysfunctional. So a heart that beats too fast or too slow, or maybe even better if it has like too low a stroke volume, something like that. Pain that lasts long after the damage has subsided or is incredibly intense, even though, say, you've only just stubbed your toe or something like that. All of these would be considered dysfunctional. And finally, a system is only considered dysfunctional if it fails in the ways above for constitutional reasons. I've said IE here under normal conditions. I think you can spell this out in terms of like proximal versus distal causes and effects. I'm not going to commit to anyone here, but basically conditions have to be the same as or similar to the conditions that this system was selected for in. So lungs that can't extract oxygen from water are not dysfunctional. They weren't selected to do that. A heart that is connected to the circulatory system, if that doesn't beat, then it's dysfunctional. But if you just have a heart out on a table, not that you would, but maybe if you're a doctor, different kind of doctor, that's clearly, that's not a dysfunctional heart. That's just not a heart that's in its normal conditions. The last example I've given is a fear system in someone who's got enough energy to move. Or I was thinking of like the scene in James Bond where he's trapped and he's like, "You expect me to talk, Wolfeld?" So that one, he can't run away, even though he's probably very afraid. But that's because he's tied down, right? So putting this together, we get these 5 features. I know this is kind of quick, but hopefully earlier talks will have made this clear. So a system is dysfunctional if and only if. I can replace that with only if someone doesn't think it's an if and only if, and it's still fine for what I want to say. If it exhibits at least one of the following 5 features in normal conditions. They are what I've just gone through. So activate by non-selected for inputs, fails to activate given selected for inputs, has non-selected for effects, doesn't have it selected for effects, or is hyper or hypersensitive to selected for input. Right, now we know this, we can turn to depression and see if it exhibits any of these features. Super, easy, let's go. Maybe not so easy. These 5 features advert to selected for inputs and effects, and we don't know what the proper function of the low mood system is. Well, I think we do, but it would take me an entire paper to argue for it. Fortunately, that paper exists and is now out in Kentness. Can you tell I used to work in marketing? Just so you know roughly what I think about this, it's not important for what we're about to do, but essentially I think low mood was selected for dealing with situations in which you're unlikely to make net gains. So a real easy example is suppose you're going out foraging, you're going to get so many calories by gathering berries or whatever it is you're looking for. You're also going to spend calories trying to get those. So if the chances of you spending more calories than you're going to gain from foraging is sufficiently low, low mood kicks in to demotivate your behavior, makes you stay inside and save your calories and other resources as well. That's a very quick overview. But we don't need to believe that I'm right about this. We can ascertain what the selected for inputs of the low mood system are and which effects are either selected for or side effects of these selected effects by looking at mild low mood. And this is because everyone agrees that mild low mood is properly functioning, is an activation of the properly functioning low mood system. So its reliable inputs must be selected for, and its reliable effects either selected effects or normal side effects, or else mild low mood would be dysfunctional by our best theories of dysfunction. Obvious case of here, someone might want to object saying, well, fine, low mood is dysfunctional. And we can talk about that in Q&A if you want, but I don't think that's a very good way to go. This next bit's really data heavy, so it's going to be super exciting. I'm just going to go through the data on mild low mood and then take a little bit more time comparing this to the data on depression. So mild low mood has a wide range of reliable causes. So the most common are failures and losses across social and non-social domains, including failure to make expected progress towards an important goal. So you fail to get a promotion, or you don't make it to a job interview, you have a paper rejected, you fall out with a friend, you split up with a loved one, or say you pass your exam that you're taking, but you don't actually do as well as you thought you would, and you're not learning quite as quickly as you'd like. That still lowers mood. Changes in external light and temperature are known to affect mood. So lots of light and warm temperatures tend to raise mood, at least in the day, and then a lack of light and cold temperatures tend to lower mood. And sickness and ill health. So if you're ill, you're usually in a low mood. That's kind of obvious. So given that mild low mood is the activation of a properly functioning low mood system, we should conclude that the low mood system was selected to take the following as input. I put representations of in square brackets in case you want to take the more proximal approach and you like representation talk. If not, you just take losses and failures, light levels of temperature, one's current health. What about effects? So mild low mood has the following defining symptoms. I'm not going to go through all of them, but they're the same defining symptoms as depression. This will be important later. And these symptoms arise like symptoms of cold. So when you're in a low mood, you don't necessarily exhibit all of these at the same time, but they come in patterns and clusters, somewhat varying depending on cause. Low mood also has a global demotivational effect on behavior. So in experiments where you induce a low mood in someone, they choose to avoid social and or strenuous activities. So social event, they probably won't go to it. It's strenuous, even if it's not social, they won't go to it. And if it's strenuous and social, they're not going to it. They still might, but they really have to force themselves. There's a strong demotivational effect. And low mood tends to motivate people to spend time being alone, being sedentary, like sitting and thinking or taking a nap. This is a little bit more complicated. Those in an induced low mood judge that the chance of good events occurring is lower and the chance of bad events occurring is higher across multiple domains compared to those in a neutral or high mood. And this extends to judgments about what's going to happen to others. So if you put someone in a low mood and ask them what's the chance of them passing an exam, they'll rate their chances lower than they would if they were in a neutral mood. But they also think that the chance of, one of the examples in the experiment is the president of the USA being assassinated. They think that's higher than those who are in a neutral or high mood. And just like some horrific train wreck happening or something like that, something that doesn't affect them. They also think that if a good event were to occur, it would be less pleasurable, generally speaking. So you think, okay, well, I might pass the exam, but I'm not going to enjoy passing that much. I don't really care. Very interestingly, though, low mood has no effect on how positively or negatively people judge bad events will be. So they think those events compared to control. So they say failing an exam, they will think that's going to be just as displeasurable as someone who's in the neutral. And finally, mild low mood has a mood congruent effect on memory and attention. This basically means that when you're put in a negative mood, you recall more negative memories and you attend to more negative stimuli. But when you're in a positive mood, the opposite, you recall more positive memories and attend to more positive stimuli. Yeah, so a summary of the effects. Again, since mild low mood is the activation of a properly functioning low mood system, we should conclude that the following are either selected for effects or normal side effects. The reason why I say this is because just because mild low mood is properly functioning. It doesn't mean all the effects are going to be selected for, just like a properly functioning heart makes a noise. But these are non-dysfunction making effects, let's say. And it's the global demotivational effect on action selection, alters judgments about the probability of good and bad events occurring, alters judgments about how pleasurable or displeasurable normally good events will be, but not how good or bad normally bad events will be. It's a lot of good and bads there. And has this mood congruent effect on memory and attention. Now that I realized was a wall of data, so I'm going to show you it again, but this time with depression. In the slide, I'm not just going to say it like I'm sad at. Depression isn't dysfunctional. We're now in a position to see if depression exhibits features 1 through 5. And I'm just going to go through features 1 through 5, show you that the data on depression is pretty much the same as it is on mild low mood, differing only in severity and duration. And thus, it doesn't exhibit any of these features. So features 1 and 2, it's all about inputs activated by non-selected for inputs and fails to activate given selected for inputs. Well, given that depression is the activation of the low mood system, we can rule out the idea that depression is just a failure of low mood to occur. But when we look at the details, we see that around 80% of cases of depression are precipitated by severe negative life events, such as divorces, the death of a loved one, and job losses. So we can rule out depression being activated by no identifiable inputs as well. But are these selected for inputs? Yes, they are. 2 of the reliable selected for inputs for the LMS are losses and failures. And as I just showed there, the kinds of events that most of the time cause depression are major negative losses and failures, such as the death of a loved one, loss of a job, divorce, bankruptcy. Smaller losses and failures in such domains also reliably raise the risk of depression and prolonged depressive episodes. And successes that counteract the negative impact of depression-inducing situations typically lessen the severity of those symptoms and reduce the duration of depressive episodes. So even while one is depressed, if good things happen that assuage losses, failures, depression tends to subside. Tends to, not always, but most of the time. The low mood system was also selected to respond to illness and ill health. There's mounting evidence that inflammatory cytokines, which control inflammation, and other biomarkers of disease are associated with depression. And some anti-inflammatory drugs may be useful in the treatment of depression. I say maybe, the evidence is quite thin, but it's just worth noting. People also become depressed following serious injury or illness. Exercise and healthy eating typically improve depression. And clearly in these cases, the low mood system is sensitive to information about one's health. And finally, it's well documented that long bouts of cold, dark weather cause depression, and depression is assuaged as weather improves. There's even a subcategory of depression, which is seasonal depression, not SAD, seasonal affective disorder. This is very well known, and light therapy has been shown to reliably improve depression. Interestingly, it doesn't only improve seasonal depression, it also improves major depressive disorders, sort of standard depression. So the low mood system, again, clearly sensitive to the selected for inputs of light and temperature. Now, of course, some cases of depression do arise without identifiable cause. But remember at the beginning, I said that 80% of cases are caused by these severe negative life events, i.e. these severe losses and failures. And this alone tells us that at least 80% of cases have these identifiable selected for causes. So these cases with no identifiable cause really are in the minority. Not that they don't exist, they do exist, but that's not depression as a whole. Onto effects. The system's activation frequently has non-selected for effects, or the system's activation frequently doesn't have its selected for effects. Now, I've already mentioned a few times now that depression and mild low mood have the same defining symptoms, so at least on the symptomology, it clearly doesn't exhibit 3 or 4. Like mild low mood, depression has a global demotivational effect on action selection across social and non-social domains. So depressed individuals work, parent, socialize less than non-depressed individuals, and treatments for depression increase people's ability to work, parent, and socialize, suggesting that this is causal. Depressed individuals also report that they're less likely to engage in normally enjoyable, active personal activities. So things like going for a walk, things that are not necessarily social, but some of them are. And they just generally report that they prefer to engage in non-social sedentary activities, i.e. they stay at home and do little compared to doing something else. But they also prefer, I'm not sure they prefer doing this to non-depressed individuals, but certainly compared to non-depressed individuals, they like active and social activities a lot less. Yeah, so like with mild, this is the complicated bit, which is worth remembering. Like with mild low mood, depressed individuals typically judge that bad events will be more likely to occur and good events less likely to occur. That's controls. Fine. They also tend to judge that they'll get less pleasure from typically good events, should they occur, compared to controls. Also fine. And again, just like mild low mood, depression has no effect on how positively or negatively people judge future negative events will be. Have I got time to explain why I think this is the case? I do. This isn't in here, and this is an aside, but it might be useful to think about it this way. Part of the reason is probably because one of the key symptoms is anhedonia, so it's a lack of being able to feel pleasure at normally pleasurable activities. So the reason why they think they'll get less pleasure is because they probably effectively forecast and they go, well, I don't feel much pleasure now, so I won't then. But anhedonia is not an increase of negative affect. So when they effectively forecast, they don't think they're going to experience more displeasure. If I'm wrong about that, that's fine. It's not really important, but I thought it was worth mentioning. And as was the case with mild low mood, depressed individuals tend to recall more negative memories and attend to more negative stimuli than non-depressed individuals. So again, depression exhibits the same mood congruent effect as experimentally induced mild low mood. So depression has the same kinds of reliable effects on action selection, judgment, memory, attention. It has the same defining features. And since mild low mood is the activation of a properly functioning LMS, we should assume that these effects are either selected for effects or side effects of such effects. Thus, in depression, people's low mood systems don't usually exhibit 3 or 4. Final feature, the system is hyper or hyposensitive to selective for input. Now, we can automatically remove the idea that it's hyposensitive. Depression is clearly not a problem of people not having enough low mood. But what about hypersensitivity? Does the low mood system respond too easily to input, or is it, say, activated for too long? Is it effects too potent? Something like that. No, it doesn't. Most cases of depression are caused, again, by severe negative life events. So this isn't just not getting a promotion. This is losing your job entirely. This is your partner dying. This is, or entirely splitting up from them. This is failing in some major life goal. Illness and bad weather. Oh, so yeah, because they're severe, it makes sense that the response to this would also be severe. Illness and bad weather can also last for weeks, if not months, and both can be especially detrimental to fitness. So again, the fact that depression has to last for at least 2 weeks is not a good sign of it being dysfunctional. Illness can last far longer than that. Bad weather can last literally months, and both are quite severe. Like illnesses can obviously be very severe, severely detrimental to one's fitness, and especially in ancestral environments. Cold, dark months are not good. The effects of depression are also proportional to their causes. So the more severe the depression, the more it demotivates. So if you have mild low mood, you kind of don't want to go to the party and you don't want to do anything too strenuous. When you're depressed, you're really not going to go out and do anything. And when you get to really severe depression, you get to almost a catatonic state where people don't even leave the bed. Depressed individuals exhibit a similar, albeit somewhat more pessimistic view of the chance of good and bad events occurring. So again, this severity would be predicted by just saying it's a more severe form of low mood. If you're somewhat pessimistic with mild low mood, you'll be quite pessimistic with severe or moderate or severe low mood. And the same applies to mood congruent effects on memory and attention. So depressed individuals' tendency to recall negative memories is not actually that much more potent than the tendency of those in an experimentally induced mild low mood. Really, it's only a little bit. And at least so far, there's no evidence that, as far as I've found, that those in a depression attend to more negative stimuli than those in a low mood. It's about an experimentally induced low mood. It's about the same. So this isn't even that extreme a response. So taking stock of this bit, in depression, people's low mood systems don't typically exhibit any of the 5 features of dysfunction. So we don't have reason to think it's hypersensitive. And as I've gone through before, we don't have reason to think it responds to the wrong kinds of things or has the wrong kinds of effects, broadly speaking. Thus, depression is not a dysfunction. Now I have 2 more smaller sections, and I've probably only got time to go through one of them. So I'm going to skip over the objection because I imagine it's something that someone will bring up, and I kind of you'll see what it is as I go past. But I was really hoping to be like, I prepared for this. Oh, maybe that was good, I think. So consequences. What do we do with this? Suppose you agree and you think I'm right, and depression is not a dysfunction. What does this actually mean, practically speaking? So if depression is not dysfunctional and disorders are necessarily dysfunctions, then depression isn't a disorder or a disease. Or maybe we could just drop something like the harmful dysfunction theory and say, well, depression is clearly a disorder. This is good evidence for the harmful dysfunction theory being wrong. I'm officially neutral because I don't have enough time to argue for this being the case. However, unofficially, I think we should stop classifying depression as a disorder, or at least a disease. We should stop saying it's a pathological condition. But that requires an entirely new argument. However, I really don't think that means we should stop treating people with depression. Regardless of whether it's a disease, if it's functional, should we stop treating it? And the answer is no. We treat acute pain, and this is not clearly different from doing just that. So if I, again, break my leg is dysfunctional. But if I went to the doctors and was like, I'm in a lot of pain from my broken leg, and they were like, cool, we'll fix your leg. And I said, can I have something for the pain? And they went, no, it's functional. Why would we do that? I would go to a different doctor's immediately. So clearly we can treat things that aren't dysfunctions, but we have to think about what we're treating very carefully. Because in the case of pain, what doctors are treating is they're treating a symptom of a dysfunction or an effect of a dysfunction, not the dysfunction itself. And A, they then fix the broken leg. And B, they're also careful about what kinds of painkillers they give to people. So if I break my leg, sure, they might give me morphine or something really strong. But if I go complaining of a mild headache, they're not going to give me an incredibly strong painkiller because they don't want to block the useful pain response. And at least in theory, this could apply to low mood as well, which is if someone has super severe and debilitating depression, of course, strong antidepressive drugs might be a really good idea. But if someone has a sort of borderline case of depression, you have some really strong antidepressive drugs. If you're then going to induce in them something that's similar to like hypomania, where they're just in this constant high mood, this might not be a good thing if mood is functional. Might not be. This needs data to say that it really isn't. And finally, should we tell the lay public that depression is not dysfunctional? Yes, probably. So there's already evidence that treating depression as a functional signal helps recovery and reduces stigma. And I could go on for a long time about this, but it seems wrong to mislead the public into thinking that what they have is some kind of biological dysfunction, if that is not the case. And it would also help people not turn up to a psychiatrist, be diagnosed with depression, and then their immediate thought be, I have a broken brain in some way, if that is not the case. I think that's the end. Yes. So one last thing before I go into questions. Some cases of depression really will be dysfunctional. If a system exists, it can become dysfunctional. The point of this is to show that the vast majority of cases of depression are not dysfunctional, and then everything that follows from there. So at least saying depression is a dysfunction is false, or at the very least. Thank
you. Where's the microphone? Oh, here. Okay, so in the United States, we have this thing called chair's privilege. I don't know if you have it here, and I'm sorry if it's culturally inappropriate, but I am going to adopt my chair's privilege of asking the first question, which is, you talk about the 80% of cases of depression being triggered by a serious negative life event, and that leaves 20% where maybe somebody might think that there is some kind of a dysfunction. But I wonder if it seems to me, and I just as anecdotally, I've heard people talk about getting depressed, not because of a serious negative event, but just realizing that their lives suck. Realizing, I don't mean to be flippant, but realizing that their lives didn't turn out the way they wanted it to turn out. So this could be years into a career or a marriage or whatever. And then they kind of wake up. And I worry that they might think, well, I'm part of the 20% of people. Since nothing bad happened to me, I must be one of the 20% of people for whom this is a real dysfunction. But I wonder if it's possible that some of those people, it's actually just a functional response to just a realizing that things haven't gone the way they wanted them to.
Yeah, so I mean, a couple of things on that. One, the 80% of 80% of cases is just the failures and losses. So on top of that, you've got to also include the sort of smaller cases that compound. You've got to include weather, all this sort of stuff. And it would be very rare for only one of those things to have ever happened in a case of depression. You probably had a severe negative life event that's put you in a depression. You probably got sick during that time, or something else has happened to compound the problem. And all of this sort of fits together. The reason I bring up the 80% is because that alone shows that at least the majority of cases are that. Never mind adding everything else.
I see. Okay.
As for the sort of belief aspect of it, I mean, this might be where proximal functions come in really useful. Clearly, the low mood system is not sensitive to directly sensitive to things that happen in the world. Like, it's not got a job loss detector built in. So it's going to have to take information from sensory states, beliefs, entire cognitive economy. If you wake up and you go like, my life is in shambles, or you just think that everything you've ever tried to do, you've not done successfully, you're a major failure, something like that, even if the world doesn't reflect this, that's the information that's getting sent to the system. So it would make sense. And that would still be a properly functioning system, sensitive to information about major failures. You wake up, you think you're a major failure, yeah, you'll get depressed, even if actually everything's hunky-dory. Yeah.
Okay, thank you so much. I want to hear from, sorry, I don't know your name, the doctor in training. James.
Hello, James, too.
Yes, the other.
Sorry, James.
My name's James. I'm a junior doctor working down in Cornwall at the moment. I really thank you a lot for the talk. I totally agree with the spirit of what you're saying. I think focusing on dysfunctional brains really distracts us from some of the much broader political, social factors. And also, it's a really important opportunity as a doctor. If you're able to say to somebody, this isn't necessarily dysfunctional, I understand that you're having a really hard time. It's a really, really important moment to try and establish an important therapeutic relationship with the patient. And if you're just focusing on neurons and serotonin, you totally lose that. And that therapeutic relationship, particularly in psychoanalysis, is one of the major predictors of recovery. So I totally agree with the spirit of what you're saying. I just wanted to interrogate this idea of proportionality a little bit. So from what you're saying, it sounds like if you have a really extreme life event and you corresponding have severe depression, there's something sort of functional there. It would be clearly dysfunctional if you had or I suggest to you that it appears to be more dysfunctional if you had a minor life event and ended up having a severe form of depression. The sort of things that we sometimes see are psychotic depression, where people have believed that they're dead or that parts of their bodies are rotting, or they're sort of catatonic states. So how do you decide what's functional and dysfunctional when you have this sort of scale? It seems to me pretty subjective. So how it seems that there's, but how do you account for that, and what's your thoughts? I'd be interested to know.
Yeah, so I think if depression is dysfunctional, it's going to be dysfunctional in this sort of graded way, where like certain depressions are more severe than they should be given holistic thoughts. How one actually decides is kind of the same problem one would decide if you have like a pain condition, and that's kind of difficult. Like, okay, someone feels pain with the slightest touch, right? Like severe pain. Clearly they have a dysfunctional pain system. But what about someone who, like, if you sort of hit their arm lightly, they get a pain sensation? Like, have they got a dysfunctional pain system? I don't know. And in this case, I think the same applies, which is these sorts of blurry edges in biology are always difficult for this sort of thing. But at least for really clear, there are really clear cases in pain, and there will be really clear cases in depression as well. You get someone who turns up and they're literally depressed over spilt milk. Not that anyone really would, but like it's possible. Clearly, this is a dysfunctional movement system. If someone turns up and they're depressed and they failed an exam and it's not the most important exam, but it is kind of important. Have they got a dysfunctional system? It's not so clear, especially when you consider when you take into account how else they're doing in life. Are they recently about an illness or something like this? So, in terms from like a doctor's point of view, how you go about it, I don't know. The same way you'd go about pain, right? The sort of philosophy and the metaphysics behind it, I actually don't have an account because I don't have an account of dysfunction. Really, I have sort of some necessary features. I'd like to know, and I suppose like a really robust account of dysfunction could give you this. Say it's so sensitive that an absence of that system would have been more beneficial in the ancestral past. That's probably one that would have been actually dysfunctional, but just a bit more here. Thank you.
Hi. I have some concerns about the analogy that can be drawn between pain and the low mood system, because there appears to be this great consistency in how pain works, where if I'm in pain, it's because there has been some sort of damage, a defect. But with the triggering of the low mood system, say something catastrophic happens, you have two people, one person responds to the catastrophic event by the low mood system being triggered and then they are depressed. Another person uses this as like a thing to turn their life around. They're extremely resilient and they just are not brought down by this. And, I think you get a consensus that the person who wasn't brought down by this terrible event is going to do better in some way. Like lots of people will say, I would rather be the second person than the first person. That's less my concern. My concern is more that the low mood system does not have this consistency in how it behaves in the way pain has this consistency. And with pain, we can very clearly see how the presence of the pain alerts us to making the necessary repairs to the defect. Whereas with the low mood system, it's not quite clear to me how you draw that connection between whatever might be damaged and whatever needs to be done to repair the damage. So I wonder how much this analogy concerns you, affects your account. Yeah.
But no, that's really good. You're right. Pain seems much more straightforward in its function, and therefore, like what we should do about it. It goes, you have damage, like fix it, something like that. Whereas the low mood system is more general. It's kind of like things aren't going very well. Do something. And sure, there's the disanalogy there. I don't think that affects the account too much. At least the bit I want to use. The analogy for pain for is to say, look, we can treat functional signals. This is no different in this respect. They're both functional signals. In terms of how cautious people should be, as in doctors should be when they're prescribing medication, yeah, this makes it way more complicated because in the case of pain, you don't want to numb them to all pain because they'll get damaged. If you numb them to all low mood, it's not quite so clear what will happen. But you could, I suppose, if you wanted to think of it this way, take a sort of ladder approach where you begin with pain, which is like really straightforward, then move to something like fear, which is still kind of like danger avoidance, but it's not as obvious as pain. Like there's lots of different kinds of dangers and lots of different avoidance mechanisms. And then move from that to, say, anxiousness, where it's like potential danger and maybe social danger. And then from there to something even broader, like low mood. And if each one of these steps made sense to you, then I think the last step should probably make sense as well. Great question.
You beat me to it, and you said it a lot more eloquently than I could have said it, but I really agree with you. I was convinced by most of your argument. I think that started me thinking about how convinced I could be was when you started talking about cytokines, because as we know, there's a lot of research that compares depression to the sickness response, and one of the commonalities are cytokines. So then it got me thinking that maybe if we were to think about depression, because it is a subjective experience, then could it be that the interpretation after a while of the event or the experience makes it dysfunctional? So I had a terrible experience last year, absolutely life-changing experience, absolutely, and I'm still getting over it. But I'm still able to, I'm not saying I'm great heroine or anything, but I'm still able to, after quite some time, I'm able to start doing things and start integrating. Like this is one of the first conferences I've been to for years, for example. So I'm just wondering really, if we go back to the cytokine that you said and we see it as a sickness response, we see all the commonalities and everything, it's an acute, the sickness response is an acute response. The depression I think you're talking about is a more chronic response. And so therefore, if it's a chronic response and it's subjective and it's due to interpretation, then surely, possibly, the cognitive interpretation makes it actually dysfunctional because you can't do things. And then one other thing, sorry. You spoke about data, and I wondered what kind of empirical research you had done to come up with this data, and if there were any probabilities. Or I mean, when you said data, I was expecting one of those awful tables of stats. So I'm really glad we didn't have that. I'm really, really glad. But I'm also curious about how you got your data.
Yeah, great. So I'll mention the cytokine thing first. So most cases of depression seems on cytokine responses or something like that. But they are relevant to depression and relevant to low mood. Exactly how far we can push that idea, I'd have to wait for more data to be published because it's quite new stuff. And in terms of like how long it lasts, there's weak data that anti-inflammatory drugs and that sort of thing improve depression. So here could be an example of you end up with a depression that's caused by a dysfunction. So let's say you have a dysfunctional cytokine response, and then this causes normal low mood because the system only gets information about these cytokines. It says, look, you're really ill, but actually the dysfunction lies elsewhere. I still don't think that will be the case, in which case it wouldn't make depression a mood disorder or a mood dysfunction, but it would make it dysfunctional in some sense. I'm sure some cases will be like this. I don't think most cases would be like this, because if they were, you'd still have them exhibiting at least some of these 5 features. So I suppose it was a dysfunctional cytokine response. You would expect the system to not be so sensitive to changes in like life events and all these kinds of things because the cytokine response is still there. The cognitive element of it is absolutely, yes, I do think this is certainly a case where some people will go into a long-term low mood and then for various multifaceted reasons start thinking poorly about themselves, let's say, or they'll be like, look, I'm incurable, I'm a failure, something like this, and this will just keep feeding into the system. Whether those beliefs are dysfunctional, I don't know. I think it would really depend on a case-by-case basis. Like, if everything you do, you sort of fail at for whatever reason, it doesn't seem dysfunctional to believe that you fail at everything. Incredibly unfortunate, and again, going back to the treatment, why it should be treated. But that would have to be like a case-by-case basis. And in terms of the data, just me reading a lot of papers on this, like Google Scholar Search, look for most of the studies on low mood are just like standard induced low mood studies. So you get a bunch of people in a lab, you tell them they're doing one thing, they watch a sad movie, or you like give them a bogus test and they fail. You measure their mood, you measure how well they're doing these tests or what responses they give. And then in depression cases, you just get a depressed group, you get a non-depressed group, and you give them very similar questions. So no first-hand stuff. I'm a philosopher. I wouldn't be very good at it.
Okay, so we have one question up front. I want to get one in the chat, and then hopefully we'll have time for this.
Thanks for your very interesting talk. I was wondering if I understood you correctly, that you're arguing you have these group of low mood people and they have all these features and they're clearly functional in some way. And then you have this group of depressed people with very similar features. And you argue, well, if the first group is functional in some way, probably the second group is also functional in some way, right? I worry about the overlap between the two groups because depression, the symptoms and the diagnostic criteria for depression is low mood. So isn't this actually the same group that you're talking about? And there isn't really this difference that you can contrast, which you did really nicely. I liked it, but I'm worried that it's not really there because it's the same group.
Oh, I mean, I agree with you. But the way that the line has been drawn has been, well, people who exhibit this many features for this amount of time, they are depressed. And according to DSM, that means they have a dysfunctional system. And I agree that the line is entirely arbitrary. And I think I've hopefully shown that it's completely arbitrary. I also want to go through more than just core symptoms, which is why I've gone through all this stuff on judgments. And because you could say, well, they exhibit the same core symptoms, say like anhedonia, you have this low feeling, you're slower, all this sort of stuff. But actually, when you look at judgments, people who are depressed make wildly different judgments. And then that would be a good reason to think it's dysfunctional, but they don't. So basically, yes, I think they've drawn the line arbitrarily, and I've given my best argument to show that this is the case. And I think a lot of the time they are the same group of people. Now, the way they choose these groups is one, they get people in a normal mood, induce a mood, and in the depressed case, they get people who are diagnosed as being depressed, or like dysphoric analogs. So they get people who are not officially diagnosed, but they've been in a very deep low mood for quite some time. So, yeah.
James, I want to try to get to one in the chat and then one question over here if
Mhm.
we have time. The first has to do with depression in the context of bipolar disorder. Do you think it's plausible that that's dysfunctional?
Yeah, so what I've said here is just for unipolar depression, major depression, what people just normally say is depression. This doesn't apply to bipolar depression. I would have to go through lots of different data to really see one way or the other. I imagine more cases of bipolar disorder are dysfunctional, especially, I can never remember whether it's type 1 or type 2, but hypermania. One of the core features of that people's mood is sort of recalcitrant to input. So their low mood is essentially blocked. They can't go in a low mood following really severe negative life events. So they'll just spend all their money in the casino, drunk drive. They're just like, great. And type 2, thank you. And yeah, so it seems like hypermania, given that that's a key symptom, is probably dysfunctional. But again, this is sort of unofficial. Probably. I know less about type 1.
Okay, let's do one more.
So one of the reasons I came to King's College was to find out what makes depression and what makes just low mood order. That I went through a year and a half here, and nobody taught me that. So it's not your fault, Elslin. Anyway, so the language of depression and pain, et cetera, seems very difficult to demarcate what's, kind of within a reasonable evolutionary or biologic spectrum and what's pathologic. And thinking like a doctor, I have to say myself and my colleagues, we sometimes just take the language away and treat the objective. So an example of that might be someone complains of low mood, and we just know that they're predisposed to having low mood, and there is no perceptible consequence of their low mood, like you've shown, or someone who has pain. But if somebody who has low mood and also suicide attempts or can't get out of bed, those are observable aspects of their complaint. And similar with pain, someone that has pain, it's a subjective response or complaint on their part. But if they have objective findings, they have a high blood pressure, a high heart rate, they have dilatation of their pupils, these things that you can see, yes, this person is in pain enough for us to want to act on it. So I guess what's the bottom line? It seems that language and demarcation affect the the significant background of this issue. But when it comes to, intervention and treatment, et cetera, maybe the recommendation is that there be something objective and observable about the subjectivity of this disorder or these.
Great. Yeah. So, I mean, this is partly why I wanted to say at the end, the part about even if it's not dysfunctional, if it's not technically a disorder, that doesn't mean we can't treat it. I certainly wouldn't want to like tell doctors how they should treat things. I'm not that kind of doctor. Yeah, certainly if someone like can't get out of bed and their low mood is like ruining their life, they can't go to work, they can't do anything like that. I don't, if they have like a really awful life and they have, say, good reason to be in this low state, I don't think this is good evidence for the low mood system being dysfunctional. But at the same time, like, yeah, help them, right? Like, they're in a terrible state, and you should do what you can to help them out. And I think this might come down a lot to mismatch as well. So the system is functional; it's doing what it's supposed to do according to evolution. But modern environments are very different, so its effects aren't actually helpful anymore. You can just think of it this way: a lot of cases of depression will be functional but useless. Randolph Nessy talks about this a lot, where the ideas have come from. But yeah, that's sort of my general response to that, I suppose. Yeah.
All right, well, let's thank James for this talk.